Everybody enjoy their food? All right. So Casa Vega is a tradition at Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association. Jules can talk on that a little bit more. Anyway.
Jules, come in closer.
Jules, let's hear it for Jules. He's been. So Jules is 103 years old, and he is still in charge of bringing in the restaurants, and he certainly does, and we love you for that, Jules.
Thank you very much. I'm getting tired. Only been doing this since 1996. That's when we started our first restaurant in the month. And let me tell you something. The restaurant that comes to us every single year for Cinco de Mayo is.
You guys, if any of these struck a chord with you, if you want to get involved in any of these committees, you now know who you can go to. This is our board. We work for you guys. Also, in the back, we have Marty and Linda. Can you guys stand up or raise your hand? They are here every single meeting, and we thank you and give them a big thank you as well, you guys. And a lot of money too, so that's okay. So we have a few of the city officials. If you guys want to come on up here, I'm going to take you in queue.
Marshall.
But before that,
Marshall.
What's that? Before that, Captain Hamilton, you want to talk about this meeting tomorrow night?
Good evening, everyone. Alan Hamilton, LAPD Operations Valley Bureau. Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, we're going to be over at Buckley, and this is a very important thing for the community. We've been doing Run, Hide, Fight throughout the San Fernando Valley, really throughout the city. But the demand for this has grown so much that we're now getting other officers involved in building our cadre so that we continue to provide these presentations throughout the community. Run, Hide, Fight is a concept that I'm hopeful that no one will ever have to use. But we're putting the presentation on so that if you ever find yourself in a situation, it can be active shooter, it can be some type of crime in progress, there are many different situations you may be involved in. We're going to discuss concepts that will keep you and your family and your loved ones and your business prepared, safe, and hopefully with an avenue of escape. We will be teaching you some of the principles that we use in law enforcement to think about things ahead of time, pre-plan, have a plan for your family, be prepared for these types of incidents because as you've seen in the media, they continue to occur on different levels. So this would be applicable to anything from if you're in a small shop and maybe there's some kind of a criminal activity going on and you have to get out, all the way to an unfortunate incident such as a mass shooting. We're going to be providing it free of charge. We are providing it for your community, and we are inviting you to come out. We promise not to bore you. These presentations are really good presentations, and our training staff is very well trained. One of the people that we're going to have presenting tomorrow, Officer John Kong, is actually the former instructor for the entire department for our MACTAC, which is our counter assault training. So it'll be a good presentation. We will field questions. We will discuss ways to harden the target. We will discuss ways to secure your residences and your businesses, and we will provide suggestions on technology as well. I'm hopeful that people will come out. I will be there along with my staff. So we're looking forward to seeing you tomorrow night, 7 p.m. Up at Buckley. Thank you.
Hi everyone, Lindsay Imber from the Sherman Oaks Neighborhood Council, your lowest form of government. So we oversee Sherman Oaks as a government entity. We are elected officials. We have elections going on, And we need your votes, so to determine voter eligibility and to cast your ballot, sign up, and all that stuff, ShermanOaksNC.org is our website. NC stands for Neighborhood Council, ShermanOaksNC.org. Secondly, we have a board meeting on June 12th at Louis Armstrong Middle School, 6:30 p.m. We'll have a candidate forum at that time, and we look forward to seeing all of you there. Thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is Ryan Ahari, and I am the Van Nuys Sherman Oaks Field Deputy for Councilmember Nithya Raman in the 4th Council District. Wanted to give you all an update. Given that today we're all here for a homelessness forum, I wanted to let you all know that on Thursday, May 25th, our office is hosting a neighborhood support day for our unhoused community. It's going to be located at the Durant's Library in the CD4 portion of Hollywood from 10 to 2. If you would like to donate any hygiene supplies, any clothing, any food, our office is accepting donations, so definitely please let us know that so that we can deliver those to our unhoused friends. Just a couple of more things. At the request of Nancy Segoyan, if you all haven't noticed, but we worked with the office of Congressman Brad Sherman to get the trees trimmed at the USPS post office at Magnolia and Kester, and then our office worked on, there's some round of applause back there, and if there's any, and then we also got the weeds and trash removed from the sidewalks, which is city property. And then at the request of our wonderful Jeff and Maria Calvin, we are working with the Department of Building and Safety to bring the Hamburger Hamlet building, the now defunct Hamburger Hamlet building, into compliance. They've put up some illegal advertisement, and the Department of Building and Safety has sent them a notice to comply, and will be working with our city partners to make sure that they no longer put up that advertisement. Lastly, this is a long report, but I wanted to let everyone know, when I first joined our council office, our honorary mayor, Jules Fear, we took a little ride-along around the community, and he showed me a number of problems, and it's taken some time, but I wanted to let you all know that we made good on our promise to him and the community. We first started with getting news racks off of our streets. We now worked on getting Ventura's curb maintained, so all of the repainting that's been done on Ventura in Sherman Oaks, from Sepulveda to Fulton, that's 3.5 miles that we worked with the Department of Transportation to get those curbs redone. Normally DOT says give us an address, give us an intersection one by one, but we told them no, we need you to do the whole thing. We're not going to tell you, we're not going to tell you where to go, just do the whole thing. So hopefully everyone has noticed that. We're moving on to, thank you. I promise I'm wrapping up, I know I'm rambling. Just 2 more things. Our office is working on getting parking meters fixed. They are nearing the end of their lives. If folks want to volunteer with our office, we are literally going up to each parking meter to see if the display is malfunctioning, and then we are flagging it for the Department of Transportation. So if you want to join our efforts and help us out, we want to do a full sweep again of Ventura in Sherman Oaks, so please let me know, but that's the next thing we're working on, which is another thing that our wonderful Jules flagged. And finally, since mid-April, our streets really have bared the brunt of all this historic rainfall. So since mid-April, 225 potholes have been identified by our office to the Bureau of Street Services on Van Nuys, Sepulveda, Oxnard, Ventura, and not just our roadways, but also our alleyways. So we've really been trying to make sure as an office to deliver these services to the community and making sure we get our tax dollars back. If you need to get a hold of me, that's about to cut me off. If you need to get a hold of me, please let me know. I can give you my phone number and my email. That's my long report. Thank you for bearing with me. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Also, Ryan, just so you know, the building that you're talking about, the old Hamburger Hamlet building, the owners of that building, they collect $15,000 to $25,000 every single month, and they've been doing this for years and years and years, and the city cites them, and they just delay it, continue to collect the money. So why don't you go ahead and talk to the city attorney about getting some teeth and actually going after them for a little bit stronger than just a little fine that they're not going to pay. They haven't paid one fine ever.
We definitely agree. We've been doing a cat and mouse game of the city and the building. Our office is meeting with the city attorney's office to see what we can do to get some better enforcement. So we absolutely agree.
Awesome.
Good evening, Sebastian Lozano, District Director for Assemblymember Laura Friedman. I'll make this short and sweet. Assemblymember Friedman has been in the field striking with the writers last week. This week she's in Washington, D.C., advocating on behalf and lobbying on behalf of the 44th Assembly District. Our office remains busy assisting constituents with unemployment claims and housing is key claims. If you need assistance, contact our office, 818-558-3043. I want to introduce you to our new field representative, Diane Rana. This will be my last presentation here. Next month, she will be here to give the presentation, and you will be well served by her and our office always. Thank you very much.
Say hello.
Hello, I'm happy to be here. I've been in the Valley since 2010, and I love it.
Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, so our senior lead officer is going to come up. While they're coming up and giving their report on what's happening in crime in Sherman Oaks, Larry, you want to grab your committee and or your group up here, and you'll come up in a second? Okay.
Hello, I'm Officer Saldana. I'm the senior lead officer for the southern portion of Sherman Oaks. We've been working very hard. Officer Romo, she's the northern part of Sherman Oaks. One of our main problems, again, is property crime, burglaries, and vehicle break-ins. So for the most part, that's what we've been working on. And we've had a task force. We have our volunteer patrol out there, and our Captain Cifatelli brought our bike patrol temporarily going out there on Ventura Boulevard and doing some patrol actions too. So that's my little report right now. Our crime is equal as last year.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Senior Lead Officer Mariana Romo. Again, I cover the northern part of Sherman Oaks. So Officer Saldana and I have very similar crime activity or crime trends. One thing that I have noticed in my area, the northern part of Sherman Oaks, is my grand theft autos. I'm about 27 higher than last year. That's one too many. What I have noticed and we have discussed is it's primarily newer vehicles. These vehicles are being broken into. They're taking possibly the vehicle manual, going to a car dealership saying, I lost my vehicle key fob. Somehow they give it to them and they're able to break into those types of vehicles. So if you have a newer vehicle such as a Mercedes, a Tesla, I know I feel like I'm saying this all the time, but try to park in well-lit areas, in a garage if you can. You guys know what types of vehicles are in your community, so if you see a suspicious vehicle that does not belong in the area, please always call a non-emergency number saying there's a suspicious vehicle, and officers will go out there and conduct their investigation. I want to give a shout out to the table over there. They're my Van Nuys Riverside community on the east side. They have a new homeless encampment in that area, and they're asking for my help. Please help, officer. Please help, officer. And just like everyone else here, I'm telling them it's a huge collaborative effort, not only law enforcement, but LA County, LA City, state, if they're on the Caltrans side. So I just want to give you guys a huge thank you because you guys are here and you guys want to make a difference. It takes a lot of time and effort coming from, it's in the evening away from family and friends, and you guys are here. So this makes a huge difference. So I thank you guys so much.
Thank you. Okay, so Larry Slade is one of our new board members, but Larry Slade is also on our unhoused committee. He's our committee chair, and he's done a fantastic job. He has a great committee that he works with, and he, along with a few other folks, put this group together, and I'm turning it over to you.
Thank you, man. So thank you everyone for coming out. The first thing I'm going to do is just give you a quick overview of what we're going to do during this roundtable discussion, what some of our objectives are, what our focus will be. Then I'm going to give you a little bit of background to set the context for the specific issues that we're going to be talking about. And then I'm going to invite up our 4 participants in the roundtable, and then we'll get into a question and answer session that I'm hoping is more of an exchange and more of a discussion. Our primary objective tonight is to teach us all something, so that we have professionals here who deal with the issue that we're going to deal with on a daily basis. They do it for a living. They know much more about what the issues are, what the challenges are, and hopefully what some of the solutions are. So we're hoping to have a lively discussion about specifically our issue, which I'm going to get to in a minute. Before I do, I want to introduce a couple of members of my committee and thank them for their help in planning. I want to introduce John Eisen, where he's a board member. Thank you, John. Sean Kurzweil is a board member, another very productive committee member. Howard Jaffe, thank you, Howard. Leslie Elkin, who's also the president of the Business Improvement District and has a very vested interest in what we're talking about tonight and is very active in trying to address the problem. Lorna Boyd is not here this evening, and Ryan Buckenthaler are also committee members. A special thanks to Beth Hefner and to Cara Berardi for helping organize this, and so thank you, I appreciate this. Here's what we're going to focus on tonight. The issue of homelessness is very, very broad. We can't tackle it all at one time in any given discussion, let alone trying to solve all of the factors that contribute to homelessness at the same time. So our committee has chosen to focus on a specific subset of the homeless that we believe pose the most significant threat to their own safety and welfare, as well as the welfare of other people. And what we're talking about is people who are on the streets who simply refuse housing. We have heard over and over, and I believe that it's true, that the largest part of the solution to homelessness can be solved with more housing, because that's clearly part of the problem. But what do you do specifically with that subset of the homeless who just won't go inside? And they may suffer from mental illness, sometimes extreme. They may suffer from drug addiction. Often they overlap. The two of them are there. And we are struggling as a community, as a city, county, state, to try to figure out how to address the needs of this particular subset. And the reason this is so important, in our opinion, is that this is what really impacts our life in Sherman Oaks in terms of lowering the quality of our enjoyment of our community, not to mention, most specifically, all of these people that are actually suffering on our streets. They're the ones who are victimized much more often than we are. But what I'm talking about is I'm talking about the type of homeless person that when you encounter them in the street, you recognize that something's wrong. And you pay very careful attention, and you look out of the side of your eye, and when you walk past them, if you're smart, you're watching them carefully because you don't know what can happen. And it's that uncertainty and that fear that we think really is a very profound impact on our quality of life in our community. So there are all kinds of reasons that people are homeless. It's said that homelessness is a sea fed by many rivers, and certainly that's true. Over the last year, we've been doing a lot of education and investigation so that we could better understand the problem, all the while specifically focusing on this subset. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. What can we do to help them? What are the rules of trying to help them? What are the challenges, and hopefully what are the solutions? Homelessness has been going on in our country for a very long time. It impacts larger cities like Los Angeles to a much greater degree. The fact that we have warmer weather, that we have more permissive policies, greater social services, helps facilitate the homelessness problem. Years ago, when somebody was on the street suffering from a psychotic episode, the police would come pick them up and basically throw them in jail or put them in a mental institution. Well, we don't really have mental institutions anymore because the federal and state governments have cut that significantly over the last 35 years so that we don't have the same resources and facilities available. We can't house this population in the jails, as any police department will tell you. The police department and the criminal justice system is ill-equipped to address this specific subset of the community. We used to just arrest them for just being on the streets, which we can't do anymore because the laws say they have certain constitutional rights, and as well they do. The reality is that most people in the community just want this group gone. We don't want to have to worry about it. We don't want to have it interfere with our daily lives, but in fact it does. The problem has gotten so significant that many of us came out here tonight. I volunteered for this committee about a year ago because I felt that the problem had gotten really significantly bad. And it's one thing if someone is collecting cans and bottles. It's another thing if someone is in a tent under an overpass. It's a completely different story if you feel that you're in fear, imminent apprehension of getting attacked on the street. So that's a whole different kind of situation. So our present problem is exacerbated by economic conditions, by by a lack of housing, by the pandemic, which fostered isolation. There are more people that are homeless now than ever. It's estimated somewhere between 55 and 70,000 homeless people in the city of Los Angeles, although admittedly, it's very hard to make these counts because people don't stay in one place, and we don't just have the technology to count them properly. Also, when you are homeless, it facilitates and fosters the growth of mental illness. Being on the street, you can't sleep, you're worried about your safety, you're sleep deprived, you're food deprived, it starts to drive you crazy after a while, and it creates this vicious cycle that we're all stuck in now. So, what rules govern this? How are we guided by this? Well, the overarching principles are constitutional, things that the U.S. Constitution provides that limits what federal, state, and local governments can do. The Eighth Amendment, prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. The Fourth Amendment's right to privacy. There is no constitutional right in the United States, in California, or the city of Los Angeles to housing. But there are places in the world where it is a fundamental constitutional right to have a roof over your head. Places like France, Spain, Sweden, and Belgium. But what can we do? What can we do about this? Can we forcibly remove people from the street? Can we just pick them up and throw them in the paddy wagon and put them away? Can we force them to take their medication? Does the government have the authority to force medicate someone? Can we prevent them from returning to the streets, or are they destined to just do a cycle around and around and around? It's a famous case called Martin v. City of Boise, decided by the Ninth Circuit, which is guiding and limiting a lot of the rules and regulations that cities and counties can put in place to address these issues. And basically, the Ninth Circuit struck down a law that made it a crime in the city of Boise to sleep on the streets. The court found that it violates the Eighth Amendment's prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment, and they said specifically, so long as there is a greater number of homeless than the number of available beds or shelters, you cannot prosecute homeless individuals for involuntarily sitting, lying, or sleeping in public. That is, as long as there's no option of sleeping indoors, the government cannot criminalize indigent homeless people for sleeping outdoors on public property on the false premise that they had some choice in the matter. So the ruling says these people who are suffering in this situation don't have a choice, and you can't leave them with literally no other option if their only choice is to be on the street. City and state law is a melange of different overlapping laws, propositions, the allocation of billions of dollars thrown at this problem over the last 15, 20 years. We voted in favor of Proposition HHH, which allocated billions of dollars, most of which to build housing that is not spent yet. There's not an effective or cost-effective or time-effective way to build housing, which is one of the issues. The state has tripled its spending and is adding another $1 billion this year specifically to the issue of mental illness and to address that. There's a slew and a bevy of prevention programs and private nonprofits that work in concert with city and state and county agencies. But still, the problem persists. It continues to grow. What can we do about it? What the city of LA has done is try to create laws to chip away at the Martin v. Boise case, to say, okay, you can't sleep on the street unless we don't have a place to put you, but you can't do it in certain places, like in front of schools, in front of driveways, and things like that. So we're nipping around the edges of trying to figure out how to address this problem. And there's clearly a tension between the constitutional protections that individuals have and the laws that we're trying to enact to create some sense of order in our communities, at least to the degree that they used to be. So why is the problem so difficult to address? Why is it so difficult to address the problem of mental illness in the homeless? Well, there are a couple of factors that affect it. One is they're a constant movement. They don't stay in the same place at one time. Another is when you see them or I see them on the street and they're very agitated, that's often a temporary state. It doesn't stay that long. By the time a call goes into 911 and the police can respond, they're often no longer agitated. Nothing you can do to them in that moment. They're often calmed down by the time law enforcement or some multidisciplinary team arrives. We have the inability to document repeated dangerous conduct by someone because we're not recording it. Nobody's videotaping this. Nobody's on the streets taking this. So what happens is we have the experience, we shy away from it, we maybe report it, and by the time anything happens, it's gone, it's over. When we put someone on a hold and we pick them up like to a 5150 and hold them for 72 hours, which state law permits. They get on medication, they're in a facility, and they often calm down, they become cogent and rational, and by the time they appear in front of a judge, the judge has no choice but to let them go. And that's basically how this stuff works, and that is an introduction and a context for the discussion that we're going to have now. So I'm going to invite up our participants one at a time, and I'm going to give you a little information about their background, and then we're going to jump into the question and answer session. Thank you for your patience. So I'd like to first start by inviting Amy Perkins. Where's Amy? Here she comes. Amy joined Supervisor Horvath's team as the Senior Housing and Homeless Deputy, and she came to the county after directing the Los Angeles Continuum Housing Central Command. Before her work on the HCC, Amy served as a Director of Interim Housing for Mayor Garcetti and oversaw the training and development of over 100 workers for LASA. She has a long list of accomplishments that she does not want me to recite to you in detail, so I will not do that, but to say that she lives in Van Nuys, and she watched her girls grow up playing soccer in the Van Nuys Sherman Oaks Park, as did I. How many of us had kids that played sports in this park right here? So part of our community. So welcome, Amy. Thank you. I'm going to invite up Latina Jackson.
Woo, Latina!
Latina Jackson is from the Department of Mental Health, and she's worked in the mental health field for over 25 years. In her current assignment as Deputy Director to the LA County DMH, Ms. Jackson oversees the delivery of mental health services to some of the most vulnerable and impaired individuals living with mental illness. People with experiencing homelessness, veterans, individuals. Her career path includes special education teacher for children with severe emotional disturbance, community integration leader for adults with development disorders, Deputy Director of the Youth Services Department of the Los Angeles LGBT Center, and serving as an adjunct faculty at the California State University at Northridge Masters in Social Work program. Thank you for joining us, Latina. I'd like to invite Hayes Davenport to come up from CD4. Hayes is a senior advisor to Councilmember Nithya Raman and works alongside her homelessness team. The homelessness team conducts outreach, coordinates with departments, and engages with housed and unhoused constituents on all issues related to homelessness. They strive to help every individual and family experiencing homelessness on our district streets to get indoors and get care. Hayes also has a very interesting background. He's relatively new to this, but he comes to this from a history which is notable as a television producer, a writer, actor, a comedian, and a successful podcast host. And finally, and please, Hayes, thank you. Finally, and certainly not least, Commander Billy Brockway Jr. Welcome him up, Commander. Thank you. Commander Brockway graduated from USC, where he received a bachelor's degree in planning and development and a master's degree in executive leadership from the Price School of Public Policy. Commander Brockway began his career with the LAPD in 1994. His first assignments including tours at Southwest Division in Wilshire, where he worked as a patrol officer, a field training officer, a training coordinator, a crime analysis detail officer, a foot detail officer, and a special problems unit officer. In 2002, Commander Brockway was promoted to Sergeant First Class and was assigned to the Hollywood Division, where he worked a variety of assignments and was recognized as Supervisor of the Year. Thereafter, he attained the rank of detective and worked as a select the Internal Affairs group, and in 2013, he was promoted to lieutenant and assigned selected as officer in charge of the Safer Cities Initiative Task Force in the Central Division, where he worked actively on Skid Row until he was selected for lieutenant, and as aide to the Director of Office of Constitutional Policy, Policing and Policy. He now has the rank of commander and is the homeless coordinator for the Office of Operations for the LAPD. Thank you for all coming. We have 2 microphones, and feel free, I'm going to ask you individual questions. We're going to give you, we have a timer. Where's Beth? She's right there. We're going to give you 2 minutes to respond. We're going to give you a 30-second warning, but we're not going to enforce this. If you have more that you want to say, just say, can I finish? And absolutely, we'll let you do it. It's not a debate, but I do want to get in a sufficient amount of questions. Okay. I want to give you a hypothetical so we have a real life scenario person to work with. James is a 44-year-old homeless man suffering from both mental illness and drug addiction. He roams the streets in Sherman Oaks and is often found in front of several Ventura Boulevard businesses, harassing and threatening its customers. James has been known to suddenly turn violent and attack pedestrians and vehicles. He has a criminal record including crimes of violence. He's been put on a 5150 hold 9 times, but always ends up back on the street. No matter what, James refuses offers of help and shelter. So I want to set up James as a hypothetical person for us to put in context for our discussion. And let me start with Latina Jackson from the Department of Mental Health. Generally speaking, what can be done to help James, help get him off the street if he refuses to go?
I just knew you were going to start with me.
I just knew it. So there are a lot of factors there with James. You know, certainly at the point that James is presenting a danger to someone, we can intervene with a 5150. And if you don't know what a 5150 is, it's an involuntary detention to be evaluated for a mental health condition. You were right when you talked earlier, Larry, that sometimes people end up right back on the street. So in James' situation, that he may be, you know, a danger at the moment that happens, but he may not be a danger when he presents to the hospital. And a misconception is that if I put someone on a 5150, that they're definitely going to be there for 72 hours. And that's actually not the case. It's an evaluation period. So if James presents to the hospital and he's completely, you know, constituted and he's no longer dangerous and there's no evidence, you know, maybe he was a threat, but he didn't actually execute some harm on someone, James can be released. Now, I will say for the Department of Mental Health, we have the Homeless Outreach and Mobile Engagement Team. That team is really charged with addressing people that are not responding to traditional avenues to get treatment. We are street-based, we are in the community, and we often work in collaboration with law enforcement for individuals like James to bring them into the fold of treatment. So I would say, starting if James is dangerous, starting with what's happening in that moment, and if James continues to kind of reappear in the community, I would say getting the home team involved to take a look and see if there's some interventions that we can execute.
Great, thank you. Hayes, a question for you. 2 questions, actually. The first is philosophical, the second is specific. Do we, in your opinion, as a society, have an obligation to help James? And if your answer to that question is yes, can you explain to people in the community why it's also in their interest to help James?
Yeah, my answer to both questions is the same. I think we have an obligation to our communities to help James. I think we're all essentially in agreement that what we want is for an individual like that to be no longer on the street and in care. And if that's what help looks like, then that's what we, as everyone who lives in this community, need to come together to contribute on. In terms of the way the community can help, I can say I do outreach pretty much every day. I'm my title senior advisor, but I try to make field work part of my daily routine. I would say even as much as we try to be out in the street, we have the largest homelessness team in the city, even though we have the second smallest homeless population of any district. And our district stretches from the northern part of Silver Lake to Reseda. So even with the homelessness team, you know, it's the largest one, but it's 4 people. And so you all are our eyes on the street in a lot of ways. And so if you are seeing repeat behavior that is an issue, like when if DMH is coming out and is doing a clinical evaluation, but they're not seeing that person when they're making violent threats or when they're in a really like deteriorated condition, you informing us directly of what you're seeing can be useful in terms of escalating someone's care if that's a situation that comes up. I will say, just to anchor this conversation, on the bright side, that is far and away the smallest population of people that we work with every day. I usually put it around 85% of people on first contact are very eager to get inside. And that is especially true now that we have when I was first doing outreach, 2017, 2018, all we really had to offer was a congregate shelter with a bunch of people in a room in Bell, California, 12 miles away. Not an appealing option for a lot of people, but they've never been to Bell, they don't really know what to expect when they get there. Now we've opened up hotel shelters, bridge homes, all kinds of new options. So the vast majority of people really want to get inside, but this other percentage takes up a really disproportionate amount of space in our daily routine and also in terms of what we see on the street.
Thank you. Commander Brockway, I want to use the same example of James. He's on Ventura Boulevard in front of a business. He's harassing people coming in and out of the store. They're feared for their safety. They call LAPD, who comes right out. What are the challenges that LAPD faces in trying to figure out how to diffuse that situation or deal with James?
Thanks, sir. Thanks. First, I want to know why he's standing next to the guy with the best hair in the whole place. Right? It's just long. Yeah, this is very intimidating. Yeah. So, but it's a great question. So I can give you a little bit of background myself. Please don't start the clock. Like you said, Billy Brockway, born and raised in Los Angeles. I still live in Los Feliz. All my kids went to LA Unified. I see this every single day. I'm not the kind of police officer that lives 100 miles away. I live in the city because I love it. And I love to be able to find solutions. I was fortunate enough to work Van Nuys for a year as the captain. Many here I worked with before, and understand that we want to resolve any issues and concerns as soon as we possibly can. Problem is this: when we do have calls for service and we respond, and somebody says that person did something that was illegal, we need a little bit of investigation to find somebody who's a victim of that crime. That's just the way it works. So in many cases, such as my neighborhood, I will get phone calls from my neighbors and friends that says this one person who's experienced homelessness is violent, that he has a dog that bites people, he does drugs, or she. And the bottom line is we'll go out and make contact with that person, and there's not one report, there's not one crime victim, but it's the interpretation of people saying that something did happen. So what we have to do is work with our SLEAM and lead officers to identify these individuals that are the most vulnerable, to get them the services they need. But I'll tell you what, if somebody does something that's illegal, and our officers see it, or we have a victim of a crime that signs a report, then we have to do what we need to do. And then it starts the process of making sure that we get the services to those individuals that they need if they do have a mental health issue, like you're saying, a substance issue. But if they're a predator and they did something to hurt somebody or something that's illegal, then it's our job to make sure that we take them off the streets and let the justice system do what needs to be done as best we possibly can. And I will share with you some of the things that we have tried to do with the department is what's called alternative incarceration. So when you have somebody who, like you just said, sir, to be able to have the ability from the department's perspective 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to have the resources from the Department of Mental Health, from the Los Angeles Homeless Services Authority, from outreach providers to be able to work with those individuals, maybe not to penalize them for being homeless and being a drug addict or having mental health crises, but to get them the services they need. Because I'll tell you this, at 2 in the morning, when we have somebody who experiences an issue like you're talking about, and we don't have a victim, we as police officers, we want to find a solution. And at 2 in the morning, there's not a lot of people that are out there with us. So I implore everybody who's here, work with the city council, work with the mayor's office, the county, the supervisors, to address this so we have responsibility for the entire system 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which is an incredibly heavy lift. So if I didn't answer your question, I apologize. I'm still getting used to sitting next to this guy with perfect hair. But I'll be around for a while. Back to you.
That was great. Thank you. You answered my question. Amy Perkins, I want to ask you about what are some of the common issues that people like James who have refused to go inside, what are the factors that contribute to this refusal in your experience? And does the answer to your question vary from person to person?
Well, in all the years of outreach that I've done, I started doing outreach really as a kid, which I'm sure many people in here have, which is just engagement with people experiencing homelessness and helping them get connected to the services they need. That's outreach. So I started that as a child. But professionally, I would say 10 years ago. And I think it's so important to say, and I don't know what the experience is of people here who interacted with people who are experiencing homelessness. It is, people just, they want to go inside ultimately. So I know, Larry, we've talked about this, and we talked about this when we met before. I know this group is so important to you, and it's important to all of us, because people that we see in this kind of suffering, I think it's painful for all of us to witness. There are times we're just mad, we don't want to see them, but there are times it just hurts. And so I get that we want those people gone. They are a tiny, tiny population of people. I do outreach still, as Hayes does, Tina does so much outreach and has teams that do it. It is a rare, rare, rare group. Even if people that are experiencing very serious persistent mental illness, yes, it will take time. It is not going to be immediate. But if we bring them the kind of service and engagement that works with them, which teams like Latina, and Latina does a ton of training with her teams it's not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it works. It does work. I also think it's important to speak specifically to the Sherman Oaks area. When I was hearing you speak, I also live, as I said, in this area. There's so much work happening specific to Sherman Oaks, as generated by Nithya Raman's office, who reached out to our office as we're the supervisor, the county office over here. So they started, and we attended with Tina's teams weekly, and sometimes in between calls, more often than just weekly check-ins, only about Library Square, which when the calls started were 6 people. And so, but this councilwoman said, this is a very serious group. These are people who've been engaged and are really not as excited to go inside just yet. Or a couple, I think, were in RVs and saying, I might try giving up my RV, but if you're just gonna throw it away, and I hate the interim housing site that has rules that aren't reasonable, or many, a plethora of problems that they may face when they get to the interim housing site, which is another issue we can discuss and is on the homeless service system. But they say, but I'll try inside, but don't throw it away. Oh shoot, I'm at 2 minutes.
No, that was good. That was good. Thank you.
I didn't answer your question.
Well, let me give you more time. Go ahead.
Well, I just want to, what Larry is experiencing, I mean, I think I don't know why I said that, because I actually didn't want to answer that part, because this is the really, really complicated part. And I think for many of us, we know people experiencing serious persistent mental illness. We know people living in addiction that is incredibly painful, but they have networks that are able to catch them. And the fact is, I just also want to say, if you do outreach, the people you meet, so there's tons of people that are working, so I don't want to paint this population as if they're one behemoth of people. I cannot count the days I did outreach where I never met certain people because their tent was always wrapped up when I got there, and unless I went out late at night with one of the teams who does late night outreach, you'd never meet them because they were at work. I mean, I can't overstate how many people you see every day who are homeless. I promise you, you do not know they are homeless. They shower at the gyms, they borrow friends' houses, all of those things. But for this individual, no safety net. And I want to tell you, if I meet people on the tents a lot of times who are struggling, they come from our other systems of care that have failed them. They come from the foster care system. They have been in jail, and they get out. I will say, the county, I'm impressed, is trying to build new support systems. So when people are exiting the foster care system, we need to provide them opportunities for community college. We need to provide them housing subsidies more quickly so they don't fall into homelessness. But the truth of the matter is they come from systems of care that failed them. People often say like, well, be the person you were raised to be. And they're like, who was I raised to be? I was in 10 homes before I was 8. The amount of abuse and trauma so many people on the streets have sustained, I don't know if people get tired of hearing it. I get tired of the experience, but imagine the lives they've lived. So.
Thank you. So I'm going to give you a chance to challenge the premise of this talk. Because we talked about this before, and I spoke to all the participants in advance, and I said, we want to address the subset of the homeless that refuse to go inside. And by and large, the response I got is, there really aren't such people. There are some, but they're very few, and even the ones that resist, at some point, if you can keep pressing them, at some point, they will go inside. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to challenge my premise that there are such people, and explain why, if you don't think there are, why there aren't such people. Because I come up with this premise based on my own life experience and watching, having grown up in New York City, watching many, many times where somebody's in psychological distress and they just refuse help on the street. And we've seen it play out in Sherman Oaks. It's been on the news a couple of times, and to me, it's not uncommon, but I'm not a professional. I don't do this all the time. So let me start with Hayes, and you can go ahead, rebut my premise.
I can't do that. There absolutely are people on the street who are not in a position for whatever reason to take shelter when you first offer it. I would say it's 15% of the people when I first encounter them, they're not interested in shelter. Some percentage, it's going to take a few more asks. We don't give up on anybody. And so if we see them again, we'll always keep offering. I've driven people to go see a shelter location, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is great. I'm up for this." Some people are on the move. Some people are on their way down to San Diego. So you want some water? You want a granola bar? Great. I never see them again. There are lots of people that you meet and you never see them again, especially in this area along corridors like Van Nuys and Ventura. People are just kind of moving through the neighborhood. The only premise that I would challenge a little is that when you're for James, and for someone who is making violent threats and is someone who is taken into the system over and over and over again, I would say in the case of that person, there's more of a pathway towards some form of care than there is for a small subset, but there's some people like that in this neighborhood, but people we meet who have mental health conditions that don't cause them to make any threats, or they can feed themselves, they can clothe themselves, they can have a linear conversation, but they aren't fully understanding of their situation such that they just kind of remain on the street. And that's the most painful thing to see is the thing we want to avoid is just watching those people deteriorate on the sidewalk. And these are the people that we have the most conversations about, where constitutionally, and because all like a nesting doll of legalities, you can't just, for good reason, we don't want to live in a country where you can just point at someone and say that person needs to be in an institution. But we never want to just wait for it to get to the point of desperation, injury, death, all the ways we've seen this end so many times. And so when it comes to shelter refusal, it's a very small number of people, but those are the people that I think we are still developing pathways for as a city, county, state, country.
Yeah, I'd like everyone to answer that question, please, if you can. Commander, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, I'm going to get on my soapbox for a second. So, this is a marathon, it's not a sprint. In working with, and I don't want to say ever deal with, but working with people who are in mental health crisis, substance abuse, broken homes. I mentioned this last time I was here. In law enforcement, we treat the symptoms of what I just described. Symptoms. That's reactionary. It's understanding what those causes are, what those root causes are. And everybody up here on this panel understands what that root cause is, and how do we get that person to the point where we will them to want what they should want for themselves. We think about it. How do we get somebody to that point? It's difficult. It's building relationships. I think everybody in this room that has kids, I know I look young, but I have a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 19-year-old. That was a joke. And each one of my kids is extremely bright, thankfully, but each one of them is motivated a different way. If I ask my son to walk the dog, he says he wants money. If my 13-year-old I ask to walk the dog, she says, I don't want money. That's not going to motivate me. So how do we get somebody to that point? How? And I will share one quick story. In working in Skid Row is 3rd to 7th Main Alameda, 52 square blocks of failure society. Simple as that. But each one of those people that are there came from somewhere. Again, the symptoms and the causes. No one's born 28 years old addicted to narcotics. No one's born 36 years old with a mental health disorder. No, it doesn't happen. They come from somewhere. And there's a family that we need to try to reunite them with. And I will share the frustrations that I had in Skid Row. I went home every day exhausted, frustrated, and overwhelmed, because we were taking a viewpoint where it was law enforcement first. And it has there to be able to address the issues, because each one of them are extremely complicated, extremely. But I had a senior lead officer who had arrested a person who we knew, and everybody in this room knows who that homeless person is, or mental health or substance abuse person in your neighborhood is. And they are the most vulnerable. And you have to be able to address those individuals with everyone that is up here today, so that we can focus it strategically on how to help. But that senior lead officer arrested the same person, gosh knows how many times, for being drunk in public, disorderly, urinated in public, all that stuff. Brought him into Central Station. If you've never been to Central Station, it's an experience. And I'm 27 years old, look what it did to me. And needless to say, we arrested this person for the umpteenth time. And he sat in the bottom of that jail cell and urinated himself, defecated himself, threw up on himself. And that's it. I didn't think anything of it. So every 6 weeks we go in front of the chief of police in what's called CompStat, where you get yelled at by the chief of police about how you're not solving crime quantitatively. And as I was walking back from Comstat to Central Division, which is a journey in itself, that gentleman walked up to me and said, "Hey, I want to thank you." And I said, "For what? I don't know you." And he goes, "One of your officers arrested me 3 years ago, and I've been clean and sober since." And I said, "What did the officer say for you to do this?" And he said, "There's nothing you can say. I made that decision for myself. I just need the opportunity." But there are predators that are out there, and believe me, we'll do everything that we possibly can to address those predators, but to also make sure that people are held accountable to ensure that they do what needs to be done to help somebody.
Thank you. Thank you. Latina Jackson? You remember the question?
I think I remember but you want to repeat the question?
I knew you were going to. My question was to ask you to challenge my premise that there are some people who refuse to go inside.
So, I think what I'll say in the years that I've worked for the Department of Mental Health, and I will preface this with saying that I come to this work because I grew up in a family impacted by severe mental illness. So my mother had bipolar disorder, which took her life when I was an infant. And my sister spent most of my childhood in and out of Camarillo State Hospital. So what I know about these illnesses as a clinician is that just like if you got a broken leg today, I could take an x-ray and I could see that there's a fracture there, and that would give me some indication of the treatment that I need to do to remedy the fracture. With a severe mental illness, you have a symptom called anagnosia, and anagnosia means you don't believe you have an illness. There's nothing wrong with you. That is a symptom of a severe psychotic state, someone with schizophrenia, someone with bipolar disorder. So on the surface, I would say, yes, maybe somebody says to you, "I don't need help because," and I just heard this today from someone, "No, I don't need help because the FBI has got it taken care of, and I own this entire city, and I'm good, but thank you so much for stopping by." Does that mean that they don't want help, that they don't need help, or does that mean that they're stuck in their illness and are having a hard time kind of relating and coming out? So I very much concur with what you just said about everyone needing something different, right? And so when I work with people, I really try to get to what motivates them. And I've seen like the weirdest interventions work. Like one team worked with an individual that was living under a freeway bridge for like 7 years, and it just so happened somebody had a conversation with him about where he grew up and what he liked, and he talked about Legos. Like, he loved Legos. And somebody had the wherewithal to bring Legos, to go to Toys R Us and bring Legos the next day for an intervention, and that changed everything. Just changed the game. We were able to connect. We were able to start medication, some months later. But it's a process, and it takes time, and it is not easy. And thank God people wear their civil liberties. I pray no one ever dies with their civil liberties on them. But there is a time in our country where we used to institutionalize people with these illnesses in perpetuity, and they would die, in these institutions, and never interact with family, not have a full and fulfilling life. And they're treatable illnesses. People, just as Amy said, you walk by people who are experiencing homelessness every day and you don't know it. You walk by people every day with severe mental illness and you don't know it. They're being treated for that illness, and whatever motivated them to get that treatment, I would say that there are people that we encounter that are resistant, but does that mean that they don't want help, or does that mean that we need to find a way to help them? So.
Thank you.
I love listening to Latina. I'll just quickly say, so I work with a veteran I met at the end of 21, and I keep in touch with him always, William, because William is my best teacher about this. And I have to be honest, so we have a lot of conversations. Larry and I's first conversation was about the idea of involuntary hold and changing the threshold so that you can more easily lock people up, as Latina referenced. And so there have been times with William, who I am watching die through his addiction. I've watched him get sober, and when his sobriety is there, then his mental illness completely comes back, and that's when he'll quickly go back to use, because his brain is such an enemy. And it's interesting too, he's very afraid of drugs that are prescribed. So he's really frightened of a doctor prescription, but he'll take any med that he buys on the street. But, so I wrestle. William has been my best teacher, because I think for a while I started to lean toward this population that we're speaking of tonight. Do we need to reconsider the threshold? And I have pushed William to involuntary hold. He was having a psychotic episode one night. I called the VA hospital and I said, I'm bringing him, you're gonna have to take him. And they did, and they locked him up, and he was held. He ended up being held longer. It was about 40 days when he was released. And yes, we had a really nice conversation that day because he was more within, but his fear was really activated because his mental health was there. I knew when I dropped him off at a shelter, he'd be using within a short amount of time, which he was. But do you know, since that day I took him, he has not gone back to the VA because he's afraid they're gonna lock him up again. So it was such a great lesson for me that this is, first of all, he was not gonna stay locked up. He is gonna get better. The day I picked him up, he was better. And I also wanna say, he made a really good case for himself when he went to the court. At one point, even the doctors were saying, give us a little more time with him, because he was taking some medication at the hospital. And he went to the court and advocated his case, and the judge said, let him go, even though the psychiatric doctors said we'd like to keep him longer. So I think that's another issue. But I think it is so much more complicated than we all think it is with regard to involuntary hold. And lastly, if we can just create a better system of care for people, Latina has long advocated for more innovation. I do think we could help people in a different way. What we have to offer them now is so limited that we're like, let's just do it voluntary. Well, if we offered them something different, they might willingly take it.
Excellent. Okay, thank you.
Can I just
Yes, please.
say one more thing?
You bet.
And that you just spoke to it, that this notion of taking medication, like these illnesses really don't, they require medication. They do require medication. But I would say that another piece, as we're here, and this is May, and May is Mental Health Month, that another big piece of this is stigma, right? People don't want to take medication because they're seen as being crazy, but I'm happy to take whatever the dealer gives me on the street, right? And so that's another piece where we all hold responsibility collectively to combat mental stigma about mental illness and the importance of mental health and mental wellness. So I just wanted to take that little minute because it makes it so much easier to connect people to treatment when you're not a pariah. You're not a social pariah because you're doing it. So.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, so far I think it's fairly easy to tell that this is a deeply complex issue that resists simple and directed solutions. There's no one given answer, and I think I'm certainly beginning to learn that it takes a multidisciplinary, multi-level, extended period of time approach to try to deal with these issues. It's labor intensive. Commander Brockway, I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with the events that took place recently in New York City on the subway, where a homeless man was annoying and allegedly harassing passengers on the train, and he was involuntarily restrained by a regular person on the train, and he put him in a chokehold, and the homeless man died. So this is a very politically and emotionally charged event. There are a lot of people on both sides of this. People seem to have gravitated to one side or the other very quickly without really having an understanding of what happened in the situation. And so using that as an example, my question for you is, in your experience, are the homeless who suffer from mental illness more likely to commit crimes or to be the victim of a crime?
That's a great question. And I'm going to go ahead and pass.
Okay. No
It's a great question. Yeah, no, the CompStat questions are great. So it is insanely complex to address that. But what I can tell you is that when this mayor became the mayor, she came up with an idea of Inside Safe. Inside Safe, it's working. Quantitatively, it's working. I do a lot of calls where we discuss how crime is doing with somebody who's experiencing homelessness as the suspect and the victim. I don't even have to look at my numbers. We're down double digits across the city. Quantitatively, it's absolutely amazing. So it's working. I had my misthoughts, my misgivings of this would work, but it works. I know qualitatively, we go outside right now and we see the tents, and they get bigger and bigger, and we think things are getting worse. But quantitatively, We've seen a decrease in the victims that are homeless, suspects that are homeless, on each other as well. So we're going back and trying to look at numbers from years ago. I won't be able to have those numbers today, but I will share this with you. If you are homeless, you have a 63% chance more of being a victim of a crime. So with Inside Safe, we've had great success. We've seen double-digit reduction in crime, but it's still not where we want to be. It's not. So for us to be able to address the mental health issues, to try and navigate the system on business hours, nothing against anybody who's here, but it's very difficult to get people to want to work at 2 in the morning, regardless of who it is and how much money you can pay them. But that's what we need to be able to do, is to be able to get to that point where we can do that. But again, on my Zoom calls where I don't turn the camera on, I explain to everybody I look like Brad Pitt, because the numbers are so good as far as crime reduction, but they're not enough. They're not enough, but we have seen a tremendous reduction over the last 6 months.
Thank you, Commander. I appreciate that. Hayes, earlier I was talking about the Martin v. City of Boise case, where the court said you can't criminalize being homeless on the street unless you have enough beds to be able to take all or a percentage of them off the street. I want you to respond to the question of the number of shelter beds in CD4. How many do we have? Is there an increased plan? Can we get CD4 in a position where we'll have enough beds so that we won't run foul of Martin of the City of Boise, and that we can remove people from the street because we will have enough beds not to run afoul of them?
The extent to which it goes district by district is being settled in a different court case. We have many to choose from going on in the city right now, but you might have heard the LA Alliance case. The settlement of that it involves the number of beds per district and whether enforcement can happen in that district. Right now, we're in a relatively good position compared to the rest of the city, where we have about the number of beds for a little over half of the number of people who are homeless in our district. Citywide, it's closer to 35-40%. But we have a 100-bed shelter in Los Feliz, a shelter for 25 families also in Los Feliz, a new 142-bed hotel in Hollywood, and a 72-bed hotel in Reseda. And so that adds up to, and that's doubled in our district roughly in the past year and a half or so. We're always looking for more. But I can tell you, when it comes to enforcement and the kind of zoned approach that we take, I'll tell you the absolute last outcome that I want when I encounter someone on the street is getting to a point where they find a patch of sidewalk that's completely legal to camp on. They have 3 feet of clearance on one side, they're 5 feet from a driveway, they're 2 feet from fire infrastructure, they're a safe distance away from, they're not on private property, they're not on county land, they're a distance away from all these, any sensitive area where they can just set up for good. That is the absolute last situation that we want to encounter when we're working with someone on the street. The only thing that we're seeking is to get them to a safer place, to get them indoors. There is no good place anywhere in the city, anywhere in the world, to be without housing, to be without a roof over your head, a bathroom, and sanitation and food, and all the things that we take for granted every day. So all of our work is pursuing that goal of getting people inside. Our job is really to remove every obstacle. If they have too much stuff, we'll put that stuff in storage. If they have an RV, we'll buy it. If they were a couple that they couldn't go into a shelter together, now they can. It used to be if they had pets, they couldn't go in. Now you can take. I just brought a woman with 6 cats into shelter. You can go to any city shelter. You can take your pets. We're just removing those obstacles all the time to get people indoors, and the mayor has supercharged that effort.
Excellent, thank you. On the heels of your comment about how hard it is and how important it is to get the mentally ill homeless inside, I have a question for Latina Jackson. Is there any way to stabilize the mentally ill homeless on the street without forcibly removing them?
Yeah, I would say we do that currently with the Homeless Outreach and Mobile Engagement Team. They are a treatment team. They don't just do outreach. We are fully equipped with psychiatrists, nursing, like the whole shebang, but the goal is always to bring people indoors, as you were saying. That is always the goal. So We do bring medication to the street. We start on the street, but the very first conversation is how can we bring you indoors? And I will say, you know, our former director and our current director have had the insight to really allow the home team to laser focus on this population that is, let's say, not eager to become engaged in treatment. We have lots of outreach teams across the county that we coordinate with. The home team is a specialized outreach team that we can administer medication, we can do all of those things, and if everything is failing and we're watching the person deteriorate and they do meet the legal standard, right, because this is a legal issue, right, for grave disability, we can move forward with conservatorship or petitioning the court for conservatorship. And we are the only team on the street right now that is able to do that. So that's what I'd say.
It's accurate to say, isn't it, that putting someone under conservatorship is a significant task?
It is beyond a significant, thank you for stating that, because a lot of people think conservatorship will just, you know, they're mentally ill and they're psychotic and you should just like swoop them up off the street and force them to take medication. When you put someone in conservatorship, you are taking away their legal rights, you know, to self-determination. So it is not an easy task. The burden of proof for conservatorship is the same burden of proof for murder. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. So if I'm on the street and I'm psychotic and, you know, I'm willing to, you know, take food from outreach worker, that may be grounds enough. If I can formulate a plan for self-care, whether or not I think that's a really good plan for self-care is not the point. It's can I formulate a plan for self-care? And if in fact I can, then the conservatorship will not be granted. So that's, you know, it's a big pain point. I do wish that there were, you know, some other things in place legally that we could intervene in different ways to help people engage in treatment. I'll just say, but yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I have one last question that I want to ask to each of you individually. And when we spoke in preparation for today, I told you all that I'd be asking this question. I think I did. Asking this question. I think I did. If I didn't, I apologize. This opportunity to address the audience is that if, based on your years of experience, your expertise, your training, if someone came to you and said, I'm going to put you in charge of fixing this problem, and I'm going to make whatever resources available for you that you think you need to make this happen, what would you ask for? What would you want? And I'll start with Amy.
Well, there's so many. So, okay, so I'm gonna let Latina fund mental health needs. Okay. And the other, you know, I don't think we should take away all, because if it's just a total dream, it's like I'm gonna build ridiculous amounts of housing. They're gonna be all super staffed.
Within reason.
Food provided, right? So let's go within reason. Let's go right now in the world today. If someone was said you have the power, the number one thing that we have to do, which is the supervisor is really trying to make happen, is regional governance. So what Hayes referenced with the Carter Alliance, the lawsuit, it's created these little 15 mini fiefdoms within the council districts. So you can have someone homeless in CD4 who really would like a shelter bed, and the neighboring council districts could say, no, you've been homeless in CD4, and the CD4 sites are full, so you have to stay on the street. This is real. This is what is happening as a result of Judge Carter. And so, and then let's not forget that we have 87 independent cities within the county of Los Angeles, all of whom kind of think they want to have some ownership. We have another 1 million people that live in unincorporated Los Angeles County of our 10 million residents. So we have all these different, so we need regional governance. Los Angeles does get incredible amounts of funding. It is still short of the need. I know people get tired of hearing that. People have funded Measure H. It represents $607 million this year that we, the taxpayers, pay for. I'd love to come back, and we need to talk about what Measure H is funding, particularly in your community, and I'd love to speak to that. But if we cannot come together so that when the federal government, the state government, the county, the city, LAHSA, the Homeless Service Authority, individual grant makers are all receiving these dollars, if we don't come together and create a plan for how we will truly lock arms and implement a homeless service system, I'm not as hopeful that we'll see real change. So regional governance is my answer.
Okay, thank you. Latina?
That's I've been thinking about it since you told me this question. So I mean, I think it's not a simple solution. I think having more treatment beds that are what we call subacute. They're not, necessarily locked, but they're places where people can get long-term care and supervision that have a mental illness. I think one thing that we really struggle with is many laws to restore people's civil liberties, which make perfect sense, and yet, if I can't get medication in a person, they never quite constitute enough to have that moment of clarity. And so we've seen a number of laws come down. SB 317 just recently passed to have people
It's like the scene from Jurassic Park.
People who are incarcerated and deemed incompetent to stand trial, this law was passed so that they're not held in the jail, right? They're mentally incompetent. They shouldn't be held when they've committed this crime, and the nexus to the crime had something to do with their mental illness. I think we'd all agree jail is not the right place for them. But we release them with no medication, no nothing, and we're no longer allowed to treat them in the jail, to give them medication in the jail. So while we restore people's freedom, but they walk out of the jail just as disorganized as they were when they went in. So I think to some degree having some mechanism where we can balance that to do medication like Reese hearings on the street, to provide people with medication on the street that we haven't yet quite been able to convince, because I do find that people often, when they have a minute to reconstitute, and we're able to connect with them in that moment, it allows us to kind of change the game a little bit. So that would be a starting point for me.
Great, thank you. Hayes?
Regional governance is so important. Like Amy was saying, I have people that are down the street from a shelter, but it's in another district, so they can't get in. I also learned about people that are down the street from a shelter in our district that we never heard about because they weren't referred to that shelter. Homelessness does not respect council district boundaries. Like, none of us in this room know exactly where our council district boundaries are. It makes no sense to govern homelessness this way. Street level care, also incredibly important. What we're trying to do at the city level, look, the county's 10 million people, there are gaps in services. We try and fill in those gaps wherever we can. We're funding more street medicine. Our district is contracted with some street medicine teams that I've seen go out and do outreach with people and give them a shot of Abilify that will last them a month, which is it's a serious drug, but that's keeping them much safer for a month. Rooms, I think, are just kind of magic in a way. I've watched them save lives, transform lives, just getting people indoors. We have about 42,000 people who are homeless in LA, 14,000 beds, 14,000 people in shelter, and 28,000 people on the street. That's kind of the basic math of homelessness in the city. And part of the reason, some of you that have lived here for a few decades might remember, we used to have a lot of really low-cost hotels in the city. As recently as 1980, you could spend a night in a hotel for $1.25. And even with inflation, that's not, you can't do that today. And so since those are no longer available, that pushed a lot of people out into the street. That's why they're more visible now. Getting people back indoors and combining those two things, something we're really working on, is embedding those medicine options in the shelters. I work with a lot of people that are really eager to get into shelter, but once they're in there, they have a conflict with somebody, if there's a hoarding issue and they keep bringing stuff in, they get exited from the shelter, now we have to start all over again. This just stretches out our resources even more. And so having not just rooms, but all the services equipped to keep people in those rooms That I think would go a very long way to solving this issue.
Thank you. Thank you. Commander, you want to take a shot at this question? Last word.
Am I wrapping this up, sir?
Yes, sir.
Well, thanks, Larry. Thanks everybody for being here. This is step one. Everyone having a conversation. I firmly believe in building community capacity is the most important thing that we need to do to be able to understand what we can do and how we, as a community, we can work cohesively with the elected officials, the nonprofits, to take care of this. He said it, 42,000 people in the city of Los Angeles. LAPD, 9,000. We're down 1,000 officers. Our HOPE teams are never coming back. It's just not going to happen. So we have to make sure that we're creating a safe environment for people to walk, to play in the parks with your kids, like you mentioned earlier, and to provide a safe working environment for people like my panel peers here, people from sanitation, Department of Mental Health, LASA, to go out and feel comfortable working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that's what it's going to take. Again, 42,000, 9,000 cops, those aren't really good odds. So what I do want to say is, from a law enforcement perspective, we'll do everything that we possibly can to keep the community safe. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You call 911, we're coming.
Excellent.
You see issues and concerns that are out there, 311, blow it up. Utilize that to identify issues and concerns, to hold the city accountable. Please, I do it all the time. And I will tell you that this Inside Safe operation, as it's been working, is phenomenal. So if I was king for the day, queen for the day, that's what I would want to do, have multiple Inside Safe operations happen at the same time, which means we need housing, which means we need services, which means we need outreach employees to be able to address this and to triage those long term, not for 30 days, not for 60 days, but for eternity, for their life.
Thank you. Thank you. Two quick things. First, I want to thank all of you for coming. They're doing this on their own time. This reflects a significant commitment to the issue and to the community. We appreciate it, so thank you. Second, I want to thank you all for listening to the program. I hope you learned a couple of things I know that I did. I want to encourage you to sign up for the Homelessness Committee through Sherman Oaks Homeowners Association. We're going to start getting more active in the process of tracking where these individuals are, who they are, working to document their behavior on the street so we can become more effective in helping these guys do their jobs. With that, I thank you for coming. I'm going to turn it back over to Matt.
Thank you, Larry. Thank you, panel. So.